Welcome to Module 3, Visioning. So how can we articulate a clear vision for student success? The course learning outcomes are, number one, learners will be able to explain how equity-focused professional learning impacts student success. The second one is learners will identify and organize equity considerations relating to the institution, program assessment, campus culture, data, and the community into an actionable plan. And the last course outcome is learners will be able to employ strategic actions to integrate equity into professional learning activities. And then on the next slide, we have the Module 3 learning goals. And so I'll review those quickly. So we will identify key areas of impact from the activity in Module 2. We will examine the impact of professional learning on student success. We will review data collection methods for assessing professional learning. So the impact of professional learning on student success. So before we begin talking about that, I want to just take a moment to revisit what we did in Module 1 and Module 2. So in Module 1, we reviewed the background for professional development, key terms, and components of a professional learning program. In Module 2, we reviewed the framework and applied it to the Woods College case study. At the end of Module 2, I encourage you to apply the blank framework to your institution. If you have taken some time to apply the framework to your institution, wonderful. And if not, that's okay. You can use the Wood College case study and examples from Module 2 to complete the activity in the next section. And so that section would be at the end of, or towards the end of this module. So in this module, we will review some equity-focused professional learning activities and its impact on student success. Then we will review the Kirkpatrick levels of evaluation to evaluate the participants' learning experiences in a professional learning program. And so in the final section of this Module 3 course, we will walk through a reflective activity and identify which areas of impact are developmental priorities for the program that you are focusing on, and then how we can begin to set some actionable goals. And so in the final module, on Module 4, we will outline what those actionable goals are, and that will be something that you can take away from this course. So as a part of the planning process, I want to share not only the impact of professional learning on student success, but then how you can also assess the professional learning program. So first, I thought we could just start off by talking about how professional learning can positively impact student success. And these examples primarily focus on the classroom or the instructional part, but that doesn't mean that it's limited to that. So the first example, as you can see here, is a quote. And so before I go into reading that quote, I just want to share a little bit of background. So there is an article by Professor Costino, and it's called Equity-Minded Faculty Development, an intersectional identity-conscious community of practice model for faculty learning. And this professor focused on using a community of practice model of identity-conscious professional development that engaged faculty in a scholarly approach to the science of learning and evidence-based teaching and curriculum development, while at the same time insistently and consistently incorporating critical reflection on an exploration of how systems of power and oppression impact learning. And so in the article, they believe that faculty engagement was key to transforming the institution into a more equitable and inclusive learning environment for students and faculty. So at the time of the study, the author indicated that it was too soon to measure the impact of the community of practice on the graduation rates. And so in closing the opportunity gap for poor students and students of color at the Cal State University, San Bernardino, much of the revised courses and curriculum will not be implemented until course was going to be converted to semesters. And so even though the article was talking about how they use this model and what some of the early results were, what they found in the article is that there was a documented increase of faculty participation, and they also were able to collect quantitative data. And so here is just a quote from a faculty member that participated in this community of practice. And what they said was, through exposure to issues of microaggressions, bias, and understanding better what is meant by social justice, I find myself trying to address these issues in all of the classes that I teach. An example of how and what I learned in the Institute has affected my teaching is I now start every class talking about how different perceptions that result from our different identities and experiences are brought to the study of all phenomena. I use this exercise we did for this in all my classes with an object from home. It tends to get all the students thinking about their own bias and is a great place to start every class. And summary to that, one of the pillars of equity mindedness, according to Estella Bensimon, is to critically reflect on one's own practice. And I do believe that even as we go further into looking at Kirkpatrick's levels of evaluation, we'll have an opportunity to see how all these things are connected together. And so this faculty member was able to share and critically reflect upon their own practice, and as a result, implement changes into their classroom and to the teaching and learning environment with students. So here we have an example of a Long Beach City community college cultural curriculum audit. And so they have showed how where they were placing it as it related to total ranking for total awards, ranking for degrees, and then ranking for certificates. And so initially, as I'll state in the next slide, but they were ranking at one point at 113 out of 114 in course success rates. And so when they realized that they weren't doing well in that particular area, they created this cultural curriculum audit. And as a result of that, they were able to increase the success rates of their students in different areas. And so you can see here on this chart where they previously were in, the 70th percentile, they were able to increase all the way up into the 40th and the 50th percentile. Was that there was a flex day or professional development day, and they had a keynote speaker that introduced a cultural curriculum audit and asked them, could they reimagine their courses through an equity lens? And so at that time, they were ranked 113 out of 114 for course level success rates or student success rates. And so what they did is they began to think about how they could make a change to improve what was going on with their students. They noticed that their students of color were performing at a much lower success rate than their white students. And so as a result of that, they made a collaborative effort. And that effort include the Office of Student Equity, Curriculum Committee, Faculty Professional Learning, the Academic Senate, Institutional Effectiveness, and Guided Pathways. And so the executive leadership also began to support this collaborative effort. And as a result, they created the cultural curriculum audit. And as you can see that this professional learning that was intentionally focused on improving student course success rates did exactly that in their particular institution. And it also is an opportunity when you watch the video to see how the instructor's awareness to incorporate culturally responsive practices through different ways, right, is evident in the experience that they had with this professional learning opportunity. And so I also wanted to just mention that on the previous slide where I showed the testimonial quote or the qualitative information that was a result of the other research article that I referenced for the community of practice, they also experience and an increased awareness. And so we see that having that awareness then allows the faculty to begin to rethink ways in which they can begin to incorporate equity lenses into the work that they do. So then a final example is a Course Redesign Institute. And this example looked at success, retention, and persistent outcomes, especially those geared towards decreasing equity gaps. So this data is preliminary, but is revealed that ongoing professional learning support is critical for impacting students. For example, a pre and post analysis conducted on a course redesign professional learning activity between 2016 and 2018 and its impact on programs and course level outcomes. So we learned the following. We learned that 63% of faculty who attended CRI improved their success rates for their redesigned courses during year one. We also learned courses with the largest gains after CRI or course redesign professional learning attendance were in women in art, microbiology, French, geology, and computer science. And so we see those percentage points range between 13 all the way up to 28 points. And then the ethnic groups with the largest gains were Pacific Islander, African American, Filipino, and Latinx. And so we see that it was 16, 8, 7, and 4. And so even in that, we can see that where the 4 percentage points of increase for the Latinx student populations. This particular campus was a Hispanic serving institution. So then there would be a need for more professional learning that is inclusive and culturally responsive to Latinx students as a means to improve their student success as well as their experience in the course. And so those are 3 examples of how professional learning activities can be intentional, designed with equity in mind, and then improve and positively impact student success. So Kirkpatrick's 4 levels of training evaluation, you can evaluate the participants' learning experience through qualitative data, for instance, shared by the Costino article, which I mentioned as the first example. And then in the other ones, we learned about the participants' reaction and then their reflection. So we see in the Long Beach City example, we see what we could look can be considered a level 2 evaluation where the faculty share their reflection and how they applied their learning experience to the classroom. And so here we have Kirkpatrick's levels of evaluation. The reason that I like this is because it gives some structure and detail and how to interpret the implications or assess the effectiveness of a professional learning program. And so there are 4 levels to his evaluation process. And so the first one is reaction. And so typically when participants participate, a lot of evaluation surveys following could be an example of like a feedback form, post-evaluation questionnaires, and then verbal reactions. And then the next level of evaluation is learning. So how information was effectively absorbed during the learning session, did it map to the program or individual learning objectives? And so then it also looks at, how, reviews as pre and post test, interview and observations, learning portfolios. So did they learn what they were intended to learn? Did the participants experience that it improved their intellectual capability than it was previous? And so then we look at level 3. And so level 3 is more of a behavior evaluation, right? So when we think about institutional change or professional learning impacting the environment, the culture, right? So this is a higher level of evaluation that may take more intention, more planning and design. However, it is a useful tool to begin to think about how you can examine the behavior and the impact of professional learning on the behavior and the community and the culture of the institution. So that the participants put their learning into effect and apply it to their work, where the relevant skills and knowledge that they were able to use, was there noticeable and measurable change in the activity and performance of the participants when back in their roles. And then the last level, or the 4th level, is results. And so results could be measuring the impact of the learning activities had on the department and the institution and how it tied to the program. And so results evaluation is the effect on the business or environment, and then resulting from the improved performance of the trainee. And so this is, this language is more for probably like a corporate environment. But when we think about the institution, we could also reframe that by looking at how it affects the institution, the culture. Is it more inclusive? Is it more diverse? And then how is this sense of belonging, how the voices of the diverse groups involved and then utilized and valued? And then how does these things affect how students are actually performing? Is there an increase like we saw at Long Beach City College, where their ranking went from 113 and they rose into the 40th percentile? And just kind of looking at how you want to begin to assess the professional learning program over time and how you can incorporate this into your planning process so that you can be intentional and strategic on how you want to begin to make these observations, and then begin to design the professional learning program to incorporate these different levels as the professional learning program is launched and implemented. And then when you come back to assess what you're assessing, how you're assessing it, and then how can you use that information to inform what you all do and your future planning processes. So the takeaways from Kirkpatrick are assessing the effectiveness of the professional learning program. What was the participants' learning experience? Can the participants' learning be applied to their daily work? We understand, what the organizational impact is, and how could focus groups or 3 months post-evaluation, what types of ways could this be used to understand how this has had a greater impact on the environment and the community overall. So the next segment will be applying the framework to your institution. And so in module 2, we reviewed the framework and applied it to the Woods College case study. By this time, you have taken some time to apply the framework to your institution. And if not, again, you can use the Wood College case study and exemplars from the module 2 to complete the activity in the next section. So in the next section, we will identify which areas of impact are developmental priorities for your college or your institution, and then how to set actionable goals. And so you could take a moment to pause this, and then we will begin to go through that activity from module 2 and introduce how we will reflect and use that reflection and assessment to begin to develop actionable goals that we will be able to strengthen and flesh out in module 4. So if you would like to pause right now and just access that information, please feel free to do so, and then we will get back to the next steps. So let's take a moment to reflect. And so here I have some sample reflection questions, and these questions are an opportunity for you to just think about the current state of the program and just, draft out, brainstorm a list of some challenges, some opportunities, and even to consider what things are going very well for your program right now. And so as you can see, it's just asking what is the current state of professional learning at the institution? What are the student and employee demographics? What is working well? What are some challenges? And who should you consider as a partner or advocate to achieve the goals that you are pursuing to create this program with an equity lens? And then how does the campus overall just support student success? It's wonderful if you've applied this framework to your institution. And it's also important, if you have time, to speak with some key stakeholders and, just conduct some informal interviews, maybe have some short meetings with some people who can give some insight and feedback to some of these questions, reflection questions, to even answer some questions that are in the prompts of the matrix. And then, being able to locate that key information for each category. So when I say have an informational interview with key stakeholders, you can start with just thinking about who are some faculty leaders, some classified leaders, student or administrative leaders that can provide information about professional learning at the campus. So these could be people who support it. Maybe they've been involved with the planning of that program before, or maybe they are able to even give you insight into the campus community, the culture, things that they believe that the campus needs. And they're respected and considered influential in ways that would allow you to have some insight into the deep workings of the campus and the campus culture. So after you take some time to look at these reflection questions and the matrix, then we can begin to go into how to identify and prioritize areas of impact after we have this information. And so in the next slides, what I will do is revisit the Woods College case study to see what kind of information we can gather from conducting an informational interview or survey, so it's hypothetical, but we will see the information gathering enhances the analysis of the program. And so I'll just do an example of that so that you have just some ideas about ways that you may want to go about it. So when you're thinking about your investigation, again, I mentioned how you can identify stakeholders. Sometimes these leaders could be in governance groups like Academic Senate, Associated Student Body, Classified Senate, the executive leadership, and sometimes faculty leaders within their departments could be chairs, or they could just be well respected in their fields and in their disciplines. You also maybe have easy access to current available data on your campus website. You can also review employee and faculty evaluation information or performance review processes. And that may be slightly difficult to get, but you can also inquire with some of your department leads or your deans or managers to see if there's a way for you to gather that information and possibly use it. And so conducting some surveys or informal interviews to identify needs is a great way to just begin to start that process. And then look into information sharing processes. And so what are some ways that the campus community shares with each other, and how can you use and leverage some of that information sharing for the purposes of the professional learning program? Also, establish accountable parties. So for instance, at an institution at Woods College, as well as, maybe other institutions, maybe there is a professional development committee or a professional learning committee. But if the process is being redesigned, they might assign a task force, a work group across departments and functions where there's different parties represented on that committee. And all those parties are there to provide information and insight as a collective so that it can begin to build this professional learning program. So for example, in the Long Beach City College cultural curriculum audit, there were 7 groups involved in that collaboration. And, some of them were student equity, guided pathways, institutional effectiveness, professional development. And so you could see that through that accountability, they were able to begin to develop a program that was then launched. And as a result, it was very impactful and it helped student success. And so review program plans with each department to understand their needs. And so this is when we think about student learning outcomes, we think about the equity possibly being stated in the program plans, or even just what the student success information states in the program plan. Those are areas that you can look at and begin to identify how the professional learning program will then serve these programs' needs by addressing what is in the program plan. And I feel like that is a good way to not only articulate a vision for student success, to show how professional learning is adding value to the institution as a whole, and how it's being intentional about identifying ways to do that are tied to the institution and tied to the daily work of the instructional and non-instructional employees of the institution. So even though you've filled out this matrix, probably looking at the prompts and being able to gather some of this information from what you already know based on your experience, all of this information listed on this slide are just other steps that you can take to add and build out more information to answer those questions. And then see, where maybe some information you could identify, but there may be other means or ways that you can gather more information that is specific to that prompt. And then it'll allow you to begin to have a better zoomed out view of the professional learning program, and then where you can assess and identify the needs of the stakeholders, as well as move towards some actionable ways to address them. So let's take a moment to talk about those stakeholders again. So again, remember I mentioned Long Beach City College had a group of 7 representatives from different key areas within the institution. And so again, I mentioned student leaders or campus leaders, but here we can also talk about the Office of Institutional Effectiveness, Student Success Programs, the department that oversees professional learning. So at my institution, it is under Learning Resources and Academic Support. And that's one way to look at it. So then when we think about Woods College, that those reflection questions here are connected to the Woods College exemplar. So we see that Woods College opened a physical space to focus on professional learning. The demographics are a diverse student population that consists of a large group of disproportionately impacted, groups. It's a collaborative culture or a collegial type of culture. The focus at the institution explicitly is focusing on reducing equity gaps, and there has been some success with professional learning improving success rates. So again, here's just a reference for when you do the reflection, looking at the demographics of the institution. Woods College, this is the demographics of that institution. And then when we talked about the investigation piece, and so when we take a moment to look at the reflection piece, we're thinking about, where do we want the program to go? What is working well? And then what can we consider moving forward to improve or to increase or expand our equity lens? So I initially was thinking you could select 3 areas of impact, but let's use an example for one area of impact. So remember the 5 areas of impact that were talked about in module 2. And so those areas are institution, individual, program, data, and culture. And so all of those areas are areas that you could have reviewed in your matrix, answer the prompts, and then you can begin to look at a large picture of all those areas that you want to address. But maybe you need to prioritize one area of impact for the time being to make it easy, just also to allow you to sort through, like, what is a plan that I can develop that is actionable and that is feasible within a time frame for us to not only achieve it within 1 year's time or a year and a half's time frame, whatever it is that you decide. And then it allows you then to begin to kind of prioritize each of those areas of impact and what goals you want to define as it relates to that area, and then how you can begin to assess the impact, plan, implement, and then move forward with your actions. So what I'm doing on this next couple of slides is just taking an example of that one area of impact. So what we see here is the area that I've chosen for this particular example is institution. So now, again, this is just the same area of impact on the matrix that has the prompts. And so what you see here are the questions for each area: the employee improvement, the instructional improvement, and the student improvement. And so once we have looked at the institution and we have the prompts, then what we do is we can then revisit that investigation or that investigative piece. So here we see in this next slide, it is just an answer to each of those prompts using the Woods College example. And here you can see how the investigation highlight needs that were not known initially. So if we take some information, for example, we have the first question, does the prompt for employee improvement in the first column, and the prompt was, does the institutional strategic plan include professional learning? And so based on the Woods College case study, we have yes, but the district oversees separate mandatory trainings. And yes, the professional learning program is in the mission statement, but also the institutional strategic plan added professional learning goals, and the department redesigned their mission and goals to align with the 10-year strategic plan. So we could answer that question because that information was available, and we have some in-depth information about how that could answer this particular question as it relates to employee improvement. So here again, we have instructional improvement, and it says, what are the state or district policies for instruction? And so we have that information from the Woods College that the state instituted a change in the faculty evaluation process that included equity. And then there was a professional learning offerings can support faculty to meet the new requirement. And so the way that we can look at this example is to further investigate. I would recommend that I would take some time to talk to the academic senate and our members of the academic senate exec. I would talk to some other faculty who are currently on the committee that is creating a new faculty evaluation based on the state's mandate, and ask for their input and what they're looking at as it relates to adding this new domain to the faculty evaluation process. Then I could take that information and add it into this column about instructional improvement. And then we can continue to further discuss how the professional learning can adopt new or increased current offerings so that they are connected to supporting faculty who are in the tenure process and allowing them the opportunity to learn how to meet and address the faculty evaluation as it relates to equity or the equity domain. So again, this is just an example about how to conduct a further investigation and to spend some time going through each one, who to talk to. And so when we look at student improvement, we see that there's some current initiatives by the state and the district as it relates to student success. And so to increase by 20% the number of students annually who acquire degrees. And so at Woods College, taking some time to look at what the state has mandated and then begin to look at where the institution falls within that ranking. Where is the institution meeting this need? And then where are certain gaps? And so this could be achieved by looking at the institution's data dashboards, if they're available, or talking to the institution, the Office of Institutional Effectiveness, and asking them questions about how the institution is meeting this goal or possibly not meeting this goal. And then what are some steps that need to be taken for it to improve in this area. And so they typically can provide some of that data to you, and then it can allow the institution to begin to evaluate where they need to reduce those equity gaps, and then how they can be able to work collectively with professional learning as one option to begin to improve upon that. So again, what we've done here is we've looked at an area of impact. And even though we've asked that you just look at your own institution, review the prompts in the matrix, apply the framework by looking at those 5 areas of impact, and then zooming out and saying which areas are, top priority that we should possibly move on first and apply some specific goals that are feasible, that are easily achieved within a certain amount of time, and they're measurable, right? And so being able to do that allows you to focus on the areas that you feel are most important right now, and then allows you to continue to plan and incorporate other elements into that planning process, like how you want to impact student success at an instructional improvement standpoint, or employee improvement, and then student improvement, as well as evaluating the effectiveness of the professional learning by incorporating Kirkpatrick's levels of training. But if you have another framework that you feel is suitable and feasible for your institution, by all means, please use that. This is just a resource and a opportunity for you to identify what you think will work and explore and some options that you may be able to use. So now we have an opportunity to just do a recap. So in Module 2, we reviewed the framework, applied it to the Woods College case study. And I know that I'm being a little repetitive, but it's just a way to just clarify the difference between what examples I've used, and then hopefully those are good examples to help guide you in your own investigation and your own assessment of your institution. So at the end of Module 2, you took some time to apply that framework to your institution. And then in this segment, we are just talking to you about how you can do an investigation that builds upon what your initial observations are. And so when we do that investigation recap, we're just looking at what the stakeholders might have shared about the current state of professional learning. What did they share are some challenges or opportunities? Did they locate some key information for each category in the matrix that were by engaging with resources on campus? Did you conduct some informational interviews or some informal surveys to understand your needs? And then after your investigation, did you prioritize the areas of impact? So here we are now at a discussion prompt. So now that we've reviewed some steps that you can take to conduct a needs assessment of your institution, I would like to just recommend that you maybe take some time to reflect on your program stakeholders. So in a discussion post, list your top 5 institutional stakeholders and how you will engage with them to understand their needs. So as a review of the takeaways for Module 3, we've reviewed examples that show the impact of professional learning on student success. We reviewed the Kirkpatrick model for evaluating professional learning. We've identified areas of impact in your institution to draft new goals. And then we conducted an investigation or needs assessment to inform your program planning using the matrix worksheet. And so I hope that you were able to source some information that you can use and apply to your next part of this last module, which is building a game plan so that you could take actionable steps to achieve the goals that you've identified as a way to incorporate equity more deeply into the professional learning program. So I hope that you're ready for us to transition into the goals and action plan, which is what we will do in Module 4. So we'll revisit all the work that you have been compiling as a result of from Module 1 to Module 2, and now from Module 3, and then we'll draft an action plan. We'll revise those goals using the SMART method, and then you will be able to just identify what steps you want to take next as you enter into redesigning your professional learning program with an equity lens. So I look forward to seeing you in Module 4, and I hope that you're ready and that you feel fired up about what we'll do next. So see you in Module 4. Thank you.